Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's build where I will be building the T30 made by HobbyBoss. This is a great little kit that was released back in 2014 and I'll be taking heavy inspiration from Panzermeister 36 and his build of the T40. Inside the box you'll find only 14 sprues, of which half are taken up just by the tracks. I must congratulate HobbyBoss because with only 7 sprues of plastic you are able to build a very nice weekend build kit that doesn't require a large amount of cleanup as very few flash and pin marks are visible. Considering the price being only about €20, the kit comes with a lot of bang for their buck. A small sheet of photo etch and even a metal barrel is included. So, let's start off with a little background for this vehicle, and prepare yourself because this can get a little confusing. So, the T30 was a Soviet tank produced from July 1941. It was almost identical to its predecessor, the T40, however the T30 would have its amphibious equipment removed and be up-armoured to have 20mm of frontal armour protection. The tank would also receive the 20mm TNSH autocannon, which would be famously used on the T60. Enough about the tank, let's get back to the kit at hand. When I start my build, I like to begin with the turret, as it allows for me to have a feel of how the kit will fit together. Here the mantlet and main turret fitted together very well, however a weld line should be present where the two parts meet. This however is an easy fix. Using a small 0.5mm thick chisel, I scribe a line along the connection point of the two parts. The welds are very simple to make then. I take some green stuff putty and fill in the scribed line, using a toothpick to make sure it sits flush with the rest of the turret. The excess putty is then cut off with a sharp X-Acto blade to make sure no overhang is present. The weld bead now needs a texture, which is very easy to make, and all you need to do is make this little weld tool, which will represent a C-type shape, which is very common across all types of Soviet vehicles. All you need to make one is a toothpick and some metal sheet. Here I have some scrap copper sheet, but anything like aluminum from a Coke can be used. Using a lighter, the metal can be heated so that it can be more easily bent into shape. Simply wrap the piece of metal around the toothpick and that's really it. The DIY weld tool is complete. I like to use a set of forceps to clamp the overhang and glue it onto the toothpick so that it doesn't wobble around. Using this very advanced weld seam tool, you can make the C-shaped pattern. All you need to do is lightly damp it with a bit of water and remove the excess on a paper towel. Now you need to be careful not to push too hard into the putty, as that may cause damage and make it fall out or break away. The rest of the build process was quite simple. The upper hull came as one large piece, with the only parts needing to be glued on being the front armour plates with the driver viewports, engine covers and the exhaust. These parts fitted perfectly, something they would not expect from a HobbyBoss kit. No seam lines nor any gaps were visible after the parts were fitted into their places. With that all done, the only thing left was a photo etch. This consisted of a wire mesh at the back, which came as one large piece. This however didn't fit very well to the kit itself, leaving some nasty gaps. This can be fixed either with super glue or filler, however I much prefer the prior. There is some nice hidden detail below the engine cover. This sadly won't be seen, but it's nice to have anyway. Finally, the headlights were glued into their place, and this marks the end of the upper hull's construction. The construction of the lower hull is very simple. Firstly, the final drive housing needs to be glued on so that the sprockets can be later attached to it. Once again, the fit was perfect, with no wiggle room, meaning that the sprockets would be straight in line with each other. Apart from this, the swing arms for the suspension are relatively free moving, so I just make sure they are level by using a straight edge. I later mount the wheels, however be careful as they don't have any rubber parts in them, so that they are impossible to take off. The photo etch was primed with the use of VMS Metal Prep 4K. This is a very good metal primer and I apply a very thin coat of all metal parts. This allows for the paint to bond better to the metal so that less of it flakes off, revealing the shiny brass beneath. The whole model was primed my favourite Mr. Hobby 1500 Black. This is a great primer that I thin with Mr. Colour Leveling Thinner. Now just keep in mind this will be the thinner I'll be using all the way throughout the painting process. The primer went down very well, with only a couple of areas where the paint job was clearly uneven. To fix this, I take a high grit sanding sponge and sand away the areas to make them flat. Black primer is a very useful tool for painting because it allows for the use of black basing, meaning that some of the darkest areas which I might not be able to paint later will remain black and would make them look like shadows. Now, to paint the model, I'll be post-shading it using a mixture of Tamiya paints. This allows me to create artificial highlights. XF58 is the standard paint for Soviet 4BO, but in my opinion it's somewhat too dark and not yellow enough, but it will do the job as the darkest base layer. Now, I spray it in a cloudy pattern to make the most out of the black base. To lighten up the 4BO, I mix in some yellow-green and spray it in a cloudy pattern, but this time only on the most exposed areas, the centre of the turret cheeks or the elevated parts of the hatches. I do this again with a third layer mixing in buff. This makes the plain green look a lot more interesting. Now, to create the whitewash effect, I need to first apply a layer of chipping fluid over the whole model. Chipping fluid effectively reacts with water, meaning that any paint that attaches itself to the fluid can be chipped, revealing the 4BO underneath it. Hairspray is often used, but I haven't had much luck with it. Sometimes I put on way too much and sometimes not enough, to the point where I need to start sanding off the paint instead. Chipping fluid sprayed from an airbrush is much easier to control. I put 2 or 3 coats over the whole model, waiting for the first one to dry before applying the second coat. This allows for the fluid to be evenly distributed, and this makes the whole chipping process a lot easier later on. This was then covered in a cloudy, but most importantly thin layer of white paint to create a camouflage look. This not only creates a hand applied in the field look, but also makes the white a lot easier to chip so that the underlying pre-shade can be seen, as no modeler would ever want to cover that type of work up. Now, I only covered the turret and front parts of the hull, as often the rear would remain completely clean with no camouflage applied to save time, as the front was most likely to face the enemy first. A few areas where I want the camouflage to remain, I paint them with a few thin layers to make the difference clearly visible. This also makes room for weathering effects like oil paints being used for fading or allowing for chipping to be a lot more visible rather than being hidden away inside the removed whitewash pockets, as rust would most likely be covered up by the new paint layers. Now, finishing up with the whitewash, I am just left with starting the weathering on the vehicle. To do this, I take the AK interior set to use as pin washes. This will simultaneously create grime and depth effects, making the model more appealing and interesting to look at. First, I'll use the interior wash, which has a nice grime green look to it, making it perfect for contrast on the white. The excess product is removed with a brush slightly dampened with white spirit. You don't want the brush to be soaked in it, as you could accidentally remove almost all of the pin wash. Instead, you only want a slightly dampened brush to clean up the areas where you don't want the pin wash and blend it in around the details. Now, onto the final stage of the video, the AK Streaking Grime Wash. This has a much darker and grimier look to it, which I blend in to create streaks on the turret side and on the engine cover. The wash is very thick, so I would recommend thinning it down if you want to use solely as a pin wash. However, it's a perfect thickness to create vertical streaks. To create these streaks, you again need to get a slightly damp brush and this time adjust the streaks. You have to steer them in the proper direction and remove any parts which are unwanted. The thickness of streaking grime is good for this, as it allows for a much easier cleanup and blending process. I originally intended to use the interior wash solely on the whitewash to contrast over the 4BO base layer, and to use the streaking grime on the still green parts of the tank. This was meant to create visual interest, however I decided to mix them over each other, which in my opinion worked pretty well. Thank you a lot for coming to the end of this video, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Sorry if the quality of the camera or microphone is bad and it took away from your viewing experience, but I live right next to a train depot, and the old background noise you probably heard was, well, exactly that, a train. I'll hopefully post these videos every other week at the latest, and I will try to figure out a schedule, but as of now, it's going to be a little rough. I can't keep any promises. I hope I will see you next time, and enjoy these photos of the mall so far.